The Illinois General Assembly is about to go into perhaps a very brief lame duck session and then into a new session, and lawmakers are talking about whether they will take action to resolve the state's pension crisis, approve an expansion of casino gambling, and maybe even an assault weapons ban. Is good government about to happen? This week we'll ask Andy Shaw, whose group watches to see what kind of government we're getting at all levels. Hello, I'm political editor Craig Dellimore, and this is At Issue. Our final guest for 2012 is indeed Andy Shaw, President and CEO of the Better Government Association. That's an organization that champions transparency and accountability in government and is known for its investigations uncovering corruption. The group has been around since the 1920s. Andy Shaw joined the BGA in 2009. Before that, you may recall he was an award-winning broadcast journalist, a political reporter at ABC7 here in Chicago. I've always described him as a respected and treasured colleague, and I still feel that way, and it is a pleasure to say, Andy Shaw, welcome back.
Great to be with you, Craig, even if it took you all year to have me in so that I'm your final show.
Oh, you're on our air every week.
I'm just kidding. Happy New Year. Let's hope that 2013 is even better for us personally and professionally, and most importantly from our standpoint, that we get a little more good government.
Although then you'd have less to do.
I think I have great job security. This is Illinois.
Yes, it is. Well, and Andy, let's talk first about the whole lame duck thing. We've got a group of lawmakers many of whom will be leaving Springfield after the first week or so, and they're going to be rushing to approve major proposals in a short time span. Is this a recipe for good government?
Craig, it's a wonderful opportunity for good government and also corruption and disaster. And by that I mean you have 35 individuals, a full 20% of the General Assembly, who are finishing off their last few days. They won't be back when they swear in the new legislature on January 9th because they either are retiring or were defeated, which means in one way that they have a free vote on almost anything. There's no consequence to a vote. However, what's happened historically is that people who want that vote buy it with favors. You may recall that the last important lame duck session was 2 years ago when by one vote they passed a 66% increase in the state income tax to raise $6 billion. The single vote that brought that over the top came from a Chicago lawmaker who spent exactly 2 weeks in the General Assembly. She went down appointed just to take a couple of votes because the woman who won the seat chose not to take it at that point. Someone had to go down. She barely knew where the bathrooms were. She told me one time, I just push the button when they tell me to, and she cast the deciding vote on a $6 billion tax increase. I wrote a blog on that. I called it the $1 billion baby. The point is that you can do important things if you do them transparently and well. You also have the potential for mischief and corruption if you try to buy those lame duck votes. So, long story short, this is a wonderful opportunity to do important things as long as you don't do them in exchange for favors later, because that's pay to play.
Although, what can lawmakers whose at least legislative careers seem to be ending do for backers, for people with money?
Well, you may recall that at least a couple of the people who voted in favor of the tax increase had been opposed to the increase when they were running in their campaigns and magically were offered jobs in the Quinn administration because, of course, Pat Quinn wanted the increase. Now, those people were outed quickly for that transaction, and in a couple of cases it didn't actually happen. But we saw at least 2 cases in which people who voted yes for the tax increase after having opposed it were offered positions a month or 2 later. That is unethical, it's corrupt, may be perfectly legal, but that's what we have to prevent in this lame duck session. If they want to do important things because they're the right things to do and they've had deliberation and vetting, that's fine. But please, no promises, no quid pro quos, no backroom deals, because that means the lame duck session is truly corrupt.
Mm-hmm. Now, there is, whether it's in the lame duck session or in the new session, there is no denying the gravity of the pension problem. And yeah, and the BGA has been looking into the pension problems and the pension proposals. But what signs do you see that lawmakers are really going to be willing and able to fix it?
I can only tell you that I've heard from the two of the most influential people in this process. I've had a couple of conversations in the last few weeks with John Cullerton, the Senate president, and a couple with Steve Brown, who is the spokesman for House Speaker Michael Madigan. Both of them told me, not categorically, but likely, there would be no vote on pensions because the votes aren't there for any of the plans. And Cullerton says that the plan proposed a few weeks ago by that bipartisan group of 20 lawmakers is simply illegal, unconstitutional. To which I said to him, well, you might pass it and let the courts decide because they'll have to ultimately. Here's the bottom line, Craig. It isn't important exactly which plan they pass. We don't have a horse when it comes to the specifics. All we're saying is you must fix the problem because you can't have good government with this pension crisis. You know that the pension crisis is costing us $17 million additional dollars every day. In 2 years, it will eat up 1/3 of the state budget. That's for pensions. When that happens, there's no money for schools or health care or social services or tax credits for job creation or economic development. The pension crisis is squeezing the life out of government, and that's why it has to be solved. I'm not telling them what component parts to put in place to solve it. Find enough compromises and find enough solid reforms to get it back on solid ground so that government isn't basically simply to feed a pension beast.
Let me raise a concern that I think a lot of people have, and that is that a lot of energy, a lot of attention seems to go into figuring out ways to kick the can down the road a little bit. That they'll try to figure out yet another short-term solution and not really address the problem. It doesn't. I mean, your experience, hasn't that been where most of the thought has gone on these last years?
Craig, that's why we have the worst pension crisis in the United States, why our bonds get devalued every couple of weeks, why the pension plans are on the brink of bankruptcy, because we've overpromised and overpaid and underfunded. And you put those two things together and you have a system in crisis. Labor, which represents all of the public employees, would like to see taxes increased so that their members don't take a big hit. That's a possibility. But you're absolutely right. That can has been kicked down the road for a decade, and it can't really be kicked anymore without continuing to choke government. This is not about gouging workers and taking money out of retirees' pockets, even though that could happen to a small extent. This is about stabilizing retirement funds permanently so that 25-year-old government employees today can look forward to a pension instead of being told no more pensions. And most importantly, or equally importantly, it's to make sure that we don't continually pour more money into pensions, which have to come out of basic services that all of us want. Everyone wants teachers in classrooms, health care for those who need it, social services for the poor, tax credits for businesses that create jobs, economic development. We can't do those things adequately until we solve the pension crisis, which is why we're pushing hard. And lastly, on this point, we also have to pass at the same time, in the same bill or a companion bill, an end to all the abuses, all the ways in which people have scammed and gamed the system. Double dipping, stacking up benefits at the end, connecting pension funds A, B, and C for an enormous payout, putting sick days, personal days, vacation days into your final salary so that your pension goes up 30%. All these ways that people have gamed the system, they haven't created the size of the problem because that's not that many people. But symbolically, ethically, and practically, we must outlaw all of those ways in which people, the insiders, have gamed the system as we reform the overall structure.
And speaking of structures, I do want to talk about a structure of the General Assembly, because the new General Assembly, once it does take over, is going to find Democrats with super majorities. In other words, For our listeners, the supermajority is another way of saying that the legislature is veto-proof. The House has been veto-proof for years, but the Senate, Republican votes have been needed to override a gubernatorial veto. Not going to be the case afterwards. First off, does that make Republicans irrelevant to the process at this point?
Maybe more irrelevant than they have been. You can argue and make a good case that Republicans in the state of Illinois have had decreasing importance and leverage for quite a few years. I think what's most astonishing is what happened on November 6th. We have a state that is a fiscal train wreck. It's been described as the worst fiscal condition of any state in the country. I've already mentioned the pension system is in the worst crisis in the country. We have $8 billion in unpaid bills. It takes a year and a half to pay a bill in Illinois. The budget is that far out of whack. We have all kinds of problems with ethics and conflicts of interest. It really is a mess of a state. And yet, the same Democrats who've basically presided over this in the Senate and the House, Mr. Madigan and Mr. Cullerton, were rewarded with a 12-seat gain on November 6th. In other words, you might argue that voters would punish them for not solving our problems or making them worse. In effect, they did exactly the opposite. They rewarded them with 12 additional seats. Part of that was the redistricting, which made the districts more favorable to Democrats. That's another failure of our system, is political redistricting, which works against fair elections, but that's a whole different issue. But those people are back. Here's the problem, though. Be careful what you wish for. Now that they have the supermajorities and the veto-proof chambers, the spotlight is on them. They have to fix the problem. They can't blame Republicans anymore. The Democrats could be grown-ups and solve the problems without a single Republican vote. They'd be heroes in a lot of ways, but you see no indication of that happening at this point. I haven't heard any rhetoric that suggests that the supermajority is going to lead to anything. Maybe it'll play out further down the road.
Is the supermajority good news for Pat Quinn or really bad news for Pat Quinn?
Well, you're asking me to put on my old Andy Shaw political reporter hat, the one you now wear at WBBM, but I'm happy to do that. Pat Quinn has had limited influence up to now because neither Madigan nor Cullerton have great respect for his leadership. I think with the supermajorities, he'll have even less influence because even one of his vetoes will be meaningless if they choose to override. That doesn't mean you don't listen to the governor. He is the head man of the state. But Pat Quinn is going to have to work more in a more organized, aggressive, and forceful way, and he's going to have to convince Madigan and Cullerton that he belongs there. Remember, we referred to him for a while as the accidental governor because he came in after Rod Blagojevich was impeached. He won that squeaker over Bill Brady 2 years ago, but his popularity is 25% in the last poll. When people see the numbers like that, they don't feel a great need to rush in and support the guy. So he's got a problem. He's been called irrelevant by some. I think that's unfair because he's a governor. But the veto-proof majorities make it harder for him to exert influence.
And let's talk about one of the areas that he has tried to influence. And I think, we'll see how much influence he has, and that's on gaming, casino gambling. What do you think is the outlook for gaming legislation that the lawmakers and the public can live with? There are a lot of concerns raised about plans to not only expand gaming by creating a few more land-based casinos, but also, and one of them in Chicago, but we're also talking about racetracks having slot machines, a few other elements. What are your concerns there, and how do you see things starting to play out?
Let me start at the macro level, which is to say this. We, as an organization, the BGA, have said loudly, along with some other reform organizations, do not pass gaming until you've reformed pensions. In other words, tackle the pension crisis first and then get to everything else because pensions are most important. Having said that, the gaming bill seems to be coming together in a way that the parties can live with. We don't have a horse in the race, to borrow a weak metaphor because racing's involved. All we care about is that, one, the process is transparent, which it has been of late, And secondly, we agree with Pat Quinn. We actually supported Quinn's veto of that bill because it didn't have enough ethical components. There were still provisions that allowed people connected to the gaming business to give campaign cash to politicians, which only serves to buy votes and insulate them from proper regulation. So we agreed with Quinn. It seems as if a bill is coming together that has enough ethical and oversight components to be sound. I'm not getting into whether we ought to have all this gaming. Personally, I don't like it. I don't use the gaming facilities, but that doesn't matter. I'm a voter in that way. As an organization, make sure it's transparent, make sure it's honest and ethical. Now, realistically, a case can be made that a lot of Illinois dollars are going to Indiana and the surrounding states, and that if you have a casino in Chicago, you have a chance to capture all of those tourist dollars from the convention and trade show business. I do agree that makes a lot of sense. I have problems with a city-owned casino. Remember, this is Chicago. Remember the Chicago way, which has always been the wrong way. Rahm Emanuel, argues that it's a new day and he's an ethical mayor. But I still have problems with a city that has mismanaged so many things over the years, taking on what had always been a mob-linked industry, gaming. But having said that, let's keep it transparent. And at some point, we probably need some bill to keep some of those dollars of people who want to gamble here in Illinois.
You're listening to WBBM News Radio's At Issue. I'm political editor Craig Dellimore, and we're talking with Andy Shaw, president and CEO of the Better Government Association. I do want to ask one more question about gaming. Because as you mentioned, it seems despite this supermajority for the Democrats, that lawmakers are responding to the governor's veto and trying to craft legislation that has some of the protections that the governor has demanded. And I'm wondering if that isn't a response to public pressure for more ethics in the legislation, not just gaming, but in general, and maybe even pressure on the legislative leaders that, yes, they could force their way right past Governor Quinn. I mean, they've passed these bills before. It's a veto we're dealing with right now. But maybe they don't really want to be on the side of not on the side of the angels, and to have to force something through over ethics objections.
I think you've touched on a very important dynamic in our local and state political situation, and that is much greater awareness about ethics and about conflicts and about good behavior. We take a little bit of credit at the BGA. Editorial boards can certainly take credit for beating the same drum. Other reform groups, and a citizenry that really is fed up with this business as usual because it basically rips them off and takes money out of their pockets. They feel their tax dollars are being squandered and basically being transferred into the pockets of the insiders. So yes, I think everyone from Madigan and Cullerton and Quinn on down is much more sensitive to criticism about ethical issues and lapses. Look, our website, bettergov.org, keeps a running tally of the results of our investigations. We like to brag a bit about our most important investigations, but to me, it's about our most important results. And so when the legislature abolished the scholarship program, which had been scandalized, that was our effort, among others, and that was an important result, not dollar-wise, but ethics-wise. When the Chicago schools rebid a milk contract that had them paying more to a clout-heavy company than your school district was paying in the suburbs, even though Chicago was buying 100 times more milk, when they canceled that contract and rebid it, that was our work. When they canceled the sick day payout at the Board of Ed, which was costing taxpayers $30 million a year, that was after investigations we had worked on. When pensions that were undeserved by individuals in Lansing and Calumet City got canceled by trustees and pension boards, that was following some of our work. And even after Wayne Watson was given an $800,000 golden parachute at the city colleges after presiding over a train wreck of a junior college system, that particular board took steps to make sure that never happened again. There's reform in the air in Illinois. Now, whether it keeps going east by a big wind that keeps it from settling on us, Emanuel's more reform-oriented than Daley. Tony Preckwinkle more than Todd Stroger, Quinn, of course, more than Blagojevich. Lots of good things are happening. Will we have real good government in our lifetimes? Probably not, but it's getting a little better, and that's exactly the phenomena you referred to.
And I do want to ask you to assess how both Tony Preckwinkle and Mayor Emanuel are doing when it comes to transparency and accountability. As you point out, things have improved. I wonder sometimes, especially with the city of Chicago, there is an awful lot more information that is available through the city of Chicago's websites, through just in general. But I wonder if that information doesn't at some point get to be a lot of what we used to call white noise in broadcasting, where there's just so much of it that you can't make anything of it.
Well, in modern digital language, that's called a data dump. And to Emanuel's credit, and also Tony Preckwinkle, there is infinitely more information online today about how government operates, salaries, contracts, policies, than ever before. That's a good thing. You can't have too much data. White noise, yes. But the point is, if you want to find something specific, you can, or I can. The problem is that that's only one piece of transparency. Transparency also means that the infrastructure trust board that Mr. Emanuel put together has to be more transparent than some of us think it has to be. As he looks to privatize other things, will that be transparent enough and accountable enough? You may have noticed it took the Tribune, I believe, it took them almost giving up an arm and a leg to get Emanuel's schedule to find out who he meets with on a regular basis. We still don't have any transparency in terms of how decisions are made. Who does he listen to? What ideas is he weighing before he makes decisions? To me, real transparency is understanding the process of government, not just the product of government. And there hasn't been enough of that. But that leads to something we're going to do in 2013. People come up to me all the time and say, how's Rahm doing? How's Tony doing? And all I can do is give them anecdotal information and point to certain releases that they've given us about how they're doing. We are going to develop in 2013 a tool for measuring how government performs on all of our key issues: fairness, accountability, integrity, transparency, honesty, and efficiency, our 6 pillars. We're going to develop a tool. We may work with a graduate program at a college. We'll probably work with a forensic accounting firm to crunch numbers. But we're going to come up with a measuring tool that once or twice a year we can turn into a report, and we can tell you how these, not how Rahm's doing, but how the city of Chicago government's doing. Not how Tony's doing, how Cook County government's doing, and Board of Ed, and junior colleges, Water Reclamation District, DuPage County. We're going to do as many of these as we can. We'll have to start slowly, but this will be a measuring tool that won't force me to answer anecdotally. I will have data that will say, and I don't know yet, are we going to compare it to New York and Los Angeles? Are we going to just compare it to other Midwestern cities?
Yeah, I was going to ask, how do you quantify that?
Haven't figured out the methodology yet because it isn't 13 yet. We still have a couple days left before the calendar turns. But it's one of the 4 things we're going to do in 2013. The Accountability Index. We're going to increase our voice in the pension fight. We're going to elevate our presence in Springfield. We're going to have a BGA presence in Springfield because that's where the most money is spent, the biggest decisions are made, and the fewest people are watching. And we're just going to continue to do more investigations and more policy initiatives. But those are the key things. We need to be in Springfield. We need this performance tool, call it an accountability index or a good government index, and we have to raise our voice on the pension fight because, as I said, this is the key to whether we have a government that even survives, is pension reform.
Mm-hmm. As we were recording this, one of the later elements to pop up is another potential deal, and that is leasing Midway International Airport. This is something that Richard M. Daley tried to do and had I believe it was a proposed 99-year lease, and big $2.5 billion payment up front. Now the mayor, Emanuel, has scaled things back a little bit and says we're just considering this, but has put forth a framework. What are your concerns as we move toward a deal like that.
Remember what happened in the first one, Craig? They overpriced it and couldn't sell it, and that's why it didn't happen, not because Daley didn't want to.
Well, and the economy collapsed.
Correct. Here's what I would say about this. When you privatize, you give up control. When the city manages it, the city's in charge. When you let private folks have it, you lose control. So go slow, hold hearings, listen to the critics, dot the I's, cross the T's, read the fine print, protect our dollars. The most important thing in these privatization deals is don't sell us out for the next 100 years because you need a few $100 million today. That was the parking deal, the parking meter deal. Daley needed the cash to balance his budget without raising taxes on the eve of a re-election campaign. At that point, he thought he was running for re-election. At least that was my understanding. I was covering politics then. But so he does the parking privatization deal because it gets him $1 billion. As you know, because you've covered it, it's basically gone. The money's gone. People are still up in arms over the rates, and we're stuck with it for 75 years. So all I'm saying is Midway may be a good deal. The lawyer who's handling it is John Schmidt from Mayor Brown. I have a lot of respect for John. He knows privatization, but go slow and be careful. That's something Rahm Emanuel has a hard time doing. He's done a lot of things well, but he's impulsive and he's controlling, and those are things that sometimes force you to move too quickly, and erroneously, he stumbled his way into that teacher strike with bad behavior. Let's not do that with Midway.
I would think that it's a little bit more comforting to see that the term of the lease, if it goes forward, and again, they say no decisions have been made, would be no longer than 40 years, and that the money would be paid out over a length of time.
I think they learned their lesson. Emanuel knows the pushback from the parking privatization, but he likes privatizing. The Infrastructure Trust Board suggests that. I think he feels that the private sector is more reliable than government, and in some ways he might be.
I was about to say, is he wrong?
Well, I mean, most of his friends come from the private sector, from the high financial end of the private sector. He hangs out with very successful people, and full disclosure, many of them are major donors to the Better Government Association because they believe in good government. But the fact of the matter is, it might be smart to let the private sector do certain things because city government has not been very good at doing a lot of things. But be careful, do it slowly. When you give up control, you run great risks, as parking privatization has shown us.
Andy Shaw, thank you very much. And also thank you for giving us a sneak peek at what we're expecting from the BGA in the coming year. And those of you who listen to WBBM regularly know that Andy is a fixture on our air, doing Watchdog Wednesdays, I believe it is.
Watchdog Wednesdays at 10:20 every week, a weekend Watchdog segment, and I consider WBBM News Radio 780 and 105.9 FM, WBBM, I consider you guys to be among our best friends and partners. As you know, one of the ways we've done the rebuilding of BGA is through partnerships. And it's good folks like you guys understanding the value of watchdogs and using us, which has helped us to have a louder voice. It's nice to talk to the people that listen to WBBM. I'm going to say one last thing. End of year, go to bettergov.org. Listen, find out more about the Better Government Association. And if you like what we're doing, consider becoming a member or supporter. We're a nonprofit, and we can't do it without help. End of commercial.
Thank you, Andy, head of the BGA, for spending this time with us. If you'd like a copy of this program and to hear it again, please visit our website, cbschicago.com. I'll be back next week with another edition of At Issue, and I hope you'll be listening. Until then, I'm Craig Dellimore, News Radio 780 and 105.9 FM.